We're here today with Susan, and she's going to teach me everything I need to know about starting seeds. I'm a novice, Susan, so what's the most important thing that you need to know about when you're starting seeds from scratch?
Well, welcome to the little workshop here, Pam. I would say that seeds really need light, and they need water, and they need oxygen, and they need a little bit of heat. If I do everything completely optimal but it's too cold, they won't grow. Or if I do everything optimal but I don't give them enough light, they're going to stretch and try to get to light, like through this poor little basement window here, and they won't have enough light, and they'll die. They'll use all their energy up. So give them light and water and warmth, and give them some air, which means you're not packing them tight into a pot.
I noticed that you're wearing gloves. Is there a reason for that?
Yes, I love these. Like, they're latex gloves, simply like they use in the hospitals. And I use them for myself because when I make my little pots, I do it with newspaper, which is free and recycling. It's a good thing. But it gets ink all over my hands. So what I do, can I show you how I make these?
Sure.
What I end up with is a little pot like this. I'll show that. So you see that I have a pot that I have put soil in it. But I'm going to show you how I make them, and I think they're just the cat's meow. So I take a piece of newspaper, and all of us who have made paper mache know that it tears one way easily and one way hard. I fold it in half. This is the whole length of paper. I fold it in half. Now I've got a piece of PVC here. Where'd I put it? It's right here. Here it is. So this is a piece of PVC. And I'm going to roll this piece of paper around it. Let me make a little higher contrast here. Like this. Give it about that much room. I roll it around there, roll it up, and tuck it down in like this. And I just have the best little pot.
Voila.
Just like that. And the reason I like these is it sort of binds the roots together and gives them a little place to grow. When I would plant those out, I would want a nice strong little root ball, which this would give me, and then put it into just a slightly larger pot, not a great big one, because that's what we're talking about too with little seedlings. They have a nice strong root ball, but if you put them in a big pot, which is where you're going to eventually want them, they're going to flounder. So you have to do it from little to medium big to big.
To keep your pots clean, to keep them sterile, how do you do that?
Yes, good point. If they're brand new, they are sterile, of course. But I use them over and over because I'm cheap. So what I like to do is the ones from last year, I wash them out real well. I generally use a bucket with vinegar, some vinegar and a lot of water. And I scrub out the organic matter. And then I can shake them out real well, rinse them, shake them out, put them in the sun to dry, and really let them kind of bake in the sun for a day, get dry. But a little bleach solution, like 1 to 10, in a separate bucket that's clean. If you've got them all rinsed out and clean and the organic matter off them, dunk them in that and give them a shake and then put it in the sun. Then you really know you've got a clean pot. And some of these seeds are expensive, and they grow like $1 million. But if you put them in a dirty pot, good luck, because you're probably going to have some diseases that are either in the soil or left over from the pot, and it's not worth it. You want to have a good, strong start for your plants.
So now that we've cleaned everything, the soil you put in, is that different, Susan?
Yes, it is it's different. Don't go out in your garden and just get soil out of there. Even though it might be, you think, really good soil. I use a seedling mix, which I actually buy, and it's clean. It hasn't been, used for other pots.
So there aren't any seeds in it from weeds or things like that that would
and hopefully not very much in the way of, things that are growing that you don't want growing in with your seedlings. And I like it because it's very light, which is good because you want your seedlings to have aeration. They need air. and it's light so that the roots can grow in there strong and have something to hang on to, but they can get through it, so it's not a solid mass. So, so that's why I buy this especially for seedlings. I then put a little bit of sphagnum peat moss, which has been milled. And milled just means it's been sort of ground up. And actually, if you would put this down and put some water on it, water would stand right on it. It's hydrophobic, which means it will actually keep water away, which is a good thing. But what you want to do when you start out, like with this, what I'll do is put it in a pot, you know, a separate clean container, and mix some water with it, almost like I'm doing cookie dough or pie dough, you know, crust. And mix it up and get it wet. And then put a little bit of that on top of my pots, and then put my seeds on and just barely touch them down in. I use a chopstick actually, but I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, so the reason you do this is you do not want your seedlings getting damping off, which is when a sort of fungus grows on the plant. And I have seen it actually happen where you have perfectly beautiful little seedlings growing strong, and all of a sudden, 3 hours later, you check and they're all dead.
And so the sphagnum moss helps to
keep the damping off from happening, because it's sort of holding them up, the little leaves up above the wet soil and the damp. So it's just an extra good thing to add. You don't have to. I haven't done it every year, but when I found out about it, I thought it's a really good thing to use, especially for some of them that are vulnerable to damping off. What I do, I still got my gloves on, so I just actually put my soil in there, not very hard. I don't poke it down in tight. And there's my pot. And I do this over and over again. You'll see that I have some already started here. And again, the reason I said I like these is that they sort of make a smallish space for that root to first grow out into. And then when I want to transplant them, to begin to harden them off and put them in a bigger pot, I can lift them right out of this, and it'll be, you know, the roots will be separated from
you don't have to bang the whole pot to get all of them out. Good
and the
idea.
roots are already separated. And unless I've started like 4 or something in one of these, and then I can put it out and sort of pull the roots apart the way we did before. Oh, here, this is an interesting one. Look, I can show it to you here. I'm going to lift this up actually by the leaf and not the stem. Look at this root. How deep it is already grown, and that's just from one little seed. And I could actually put this in one of these pots here like this. I could put a little soil in it, put that down in there against the edge, give it a little more soil. Here's where my chopstick would come in handy, because I would brace it up against there. And this one little seed would just become a healthy plant.
Well, one of the things that I've noticed, Susan, is on the backs of the packages, there are different instructions depending on the type of seed it is, how far down into the ground it needs to go. So some need light.
Yes.
And so you would perhaps put it on top of your, and then some, it would tell you the depth. So you need to pay attention.
Yeah, I always read the label, even though I think, okay, this is the 30th year I've planted beans or peas. I still read the label, because one of the things I learned in Master Gardening is the label is actually a legal document. And it makes sense to read it. They probably know more than I do. And one of the things is that I found as a general rule is real fine little leaves generally, I mean seeds, will be on top of the soil, and that's how Mother Nature plants them. They drop them and they fall into the soil. Things like beans and peas generally need to go down in the soil a little bit. And do you know about, what's it called when they do a little inoculant for peas and beans. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it, but can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, this is this material that you buy a little bag of it, like this size, and it's $7. Now, I am cheap. I do not want to spend $7 on something that looks like dust. But they said it the other day again on the gardening show on the radio, and I've heard it from other people. Get it. Buy it. Get a new one each year, because it loses its vitality. If you will put your beans or your peas, whatever you're planting that needs that little inoculant, if you'll wet them just a little bit, put a little bit of that inoculant, and I use a little yogurt cup or something, shake it up, get that stuff to stick to them, and then put it in the ground, it makes a huge difference. It just gives them the vigor to grow for some reason. And like lettuce seeds don't even need it, but peas and beans, they need it. They'll be happier with it. So you can just think, okay, I'll spend that amount of money and it'll be worth it.
Talk about what you have here too. You have a heating pad and
Yeah.
you have a couple of different kinds of lights.
Yes. Actually, what I have, this heating pad, is it makes, when it's plugged in, now I unplugged it because I haven't got these quite ready to set on it yet, this new tray, but it will put out a warm heat, not hot, and it's a steady heat. And if I put my trays on this and line them up, I can get quite a few. I can get actually, 2 whole trays here on this, like that. And I've got 2 lights here. I'm actually putting another light up, because you can see that if I have just these 2 lights, I'm going to have not quite enough light. So I've decided to buy another light, which I've got and I haven't put up yet, but I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to have plenty of light. Now, I will put these actually right down. I've got them on chains or ropes so that I can put the light right down onto so it's like this far from the top of the plant. Mercury came in the picture. I don't know if he thinks he's going to help today.
Well, I've heard also of people doing their laundry when they're planting their plants and then starting them on the dryer to
what a
initially
good
get them
idea.
warm. And then
Yeah.
if they don't have a heating mat, put it on top of the refrigerator.
I tried that, but you know what I kept doing? I kept forgetting the seedlings. And when I have them here where they're right at this level, I come down, I'm not kidding, 5 times a day, maybe 6. And I come down and see, okay, are they growing yet? And then when one of them is grown, I go tell everybody. And then they have to come down and look at it to admire it. And I'll tell you one more thing, because if I would put it on top of the refrigerator, the reason you shouldn't forget it is you want to keep them a little bit moist. So for instance, I give them just a little bit of water. I don't make them too wet because they don't want to be too wet either. But when I squirt the newspaper, it just gets it damp enough that it kind of keeps them happy, I think. So I would forget them on top of the refrigerator, I know I would. But this heating pad, actually, I used it last year for the first time, a real one, an actual good brand new heating pad. And I am so glad for it. It cost me like $30, but look at how many seedlings I can start with that. And often what I do when I'm growing them is I will have like 2 whole trays of these growing with seedlings on them, and when they start to come up a little bit, then I can put a new tray on here and start them and switch them around so that they're gonna, because I come down all the time anyway, so they all get a little bit of heat. Yeah, so that's how we start our seeds.
So if you didn't have the paper, could you just water your seedlings from underneath?
Yes.
So that you don't get too much moisture on the top?
That's one of the things I really like to do. I have had, right now what I have is actually a boot tray, if you've seen those, that I put on my table and put a little bit of warm water in it and set all my seed trays in there. But the other thing I've done is microwave or refrigerator glass trays. the refrigerator ones that are square like this that are about that deep. If you put them on your table and put a little bit of water in them, and you can also, you don't want to leave your seedlings in them though, because they'll get too wet, and then they won't like that either. But if you start them out with that, or put some little risers on underneath your trays, pots, so that you won't have them sitting right in the water, then it's a nice little atmosphere of moisture for them. Humidity.
And when do you start feeding?
I start feeding after I put them out into the next, when I'm potting them up into a bigger tray or into a bigger pot. I don't do it now because they're just trying to germinate right now.
So Susan, now that we've gotten some plants together that are ready to be transplanted, is there a difference in the kind of soil than the soil that you used for seeds?
Yes. What I do is, I generally like kind of a mix that is, sometimes I make it with part seedling mix and part potting mix, but I actually like to use a very light mixture. I used to use just straight potting mix, but it's quite heavy. It keeps the plants a little too wet, and it keeps them from getting that vigor that they would have if they were very loosely planted. So they get a lot of air. They get more air this way. I brought some with me here. I brought some of this mix, and you can see, Pam, that what I've got is a mixture. It's got quite a bit of perlite in it, which is just natural. It's not, it looks like styrofoam, but it's not. It's a volcanic sort of rock, and it's got some good minerals in it. And when I do this, do you want me to start doing this?
Oh, please, yes.
Okay, so what I have here, actually, I find these kind of awkward. I've got some Chinese cabbages here that are really ready to get transplanted. These Chinese cabbage, this is a really good example that I can point to and show. Look at how different this leaf looks from these leaves. This is a seed leaf. When you first plant your seeds in a flat with just, all it looks like is you've got soil, you will get a whole bunch of these nice little leaves, and it looks like you're growing all the same thing. But actually it's not true. Here's a couple that have actually come off. But these are the seed leaves, and then when you begin to see your first two sets, or first one set maybe, of true leaves, they will look different. These are true leaves. And so almost every seed, like if you've seen a sunflower sprout or something like that, you'll see the leaves look just the same, and then the next set of leaves is going to look different, and those are the true leaves, and those are the ones that are going to be producing, so photosynthesizing and doing the work of getting food for the plant. And the roots, of course, are gathering the nutrients from the soil. So with that knowledge of knowing what a true leaf is and a seed leaf, I can tell sort of at what maturity the plant is at, so that I know if I've only got seed leaves so far, it's not ready to transplant and harden off. And so here, it's like I picked, no. So this one would be ready to harden off too, and I would just want to give it some TLC as I'm taking it out so I don't hurt those beautiful roots. Now my first thought would have been, a few years ago I would have said, okay, these are ready to go outside, but we're still having cold weather, and these need to get toughened up a little bit because they've been inside on the heating mat. They've been babied a lot. So we're going to just very carefully, I've got this good little tiny trowel here with which I'm going to just lift this and try not to tear the roots too much. Lift it out. And now see what happened was two of them came out at one time. And the roots are pretty intertwined. So I'm going to separate these because I want to put it in one pot. So very gently, I want to take the roots apart. And what I like to do is have my pot partly full, make a little place for that plant, put it down in there. Now the pot needs more soil in it, but what I'm going to do is gently hold the plant And I love chopsticks, and I love little orange sticks for like cuticles. I hold that plant up like that, and then I will take just a little bit more of this potting mix and put it in around the plant. I don't want to make it suffocate, but at the same time I want to give it a little support. Now I've got that plant here going in here, and now the project will go to the hardening off stage, which I will do this with like all of these plants. This looks like hardly any, but it's actually 6 plants, 4 here, and this other one I'm going to do. And I would water it in just a little bit. What I like to do is set it in a tray of warm water, let the plants soak that up, spray it a little bit, just shoot it with a little bit more water, and then put them back in my tray. Now when I have one of those flats like here, these trays are very useful. I line them up in here, put them back in my basement or in the light. Actually, I can put these on my kitchen counter where they get some light from outside. During the daytime, I take out the whole tray of them, set them outside on my patio where it's pretty warm, and give them like the first day maybe an hour or so of sunlight, and the next day a little more. Now we have been having some really cold mornings, so I wouldn't take it out till they're kind of, you baby them a little bit at first. And what that's called hardening off, and it's literally toughening them up a little bit. I wanted to say too that when I do this, once I've done this, I'll fertilize it a little bit. If I can find an organic fertilizer is what I prefer, like a 5-5-5, a balanced fertilizer. Look at the label. I always mix it as it is and then dilute it like at least 4 times, so you'd practically think there's no fertilizer in it. It's just enough to give them a little boost, because they're going to be growing on really hard here, and we have to give them some, something to grow on, because this mix doesn't have much. Has some minerals but not a lot of nutrients in it. So I would be doing that to harden those things off.
How do we know that we have a good root structure?
Well, the way I look is, first of all, I can tell the leaves are strong, but I want to make sure the roots are strong. And this is the one I haven't put out yet, and I'm just going to show you. I'm going to bare root it a little bit, because this plant, oh my gosh, these roots are so good and strong. If you can see, they're quite white, little tough stems. Look, there's already some little nodules of growth coming onto them, like stems, like roots of roots. Here, can you tell that in the camera how strong that root ball is? Now what I'm doing is I'm holding this also by the leaves, because what I have done in the past when they were strong little transplants, I've seen people lift them out by their stems and just pinch or bruise that stem a little bit, and that plant is probably not going to make it. If you hold it by the leaf, if this were a lot teenier especially, I would hold it by one leaf. Even though it seems like, oh, that poor plant, that poor leaf, the whole thing is being held by that. But a plant can grow another leaf way easier than it can grow a strong stem after it's been crushed or bruised. But one of my plant teachers and master gardeners taught me that when they're growing in the tray, to almost pet them a little bit, which I check them always about 10 times a day anyway, and I go down there and I do this. And what she said was that it really makes the plant stronger to do that, because it's getting almost like it's like a tree in wind is stronger than a tree that's just
So you could
sheltered.
also put a fan in if you had a greenhouse situation or where you had it, and get a little bit of air movement. And that
I think that would be really good. That's way more sophisticated than what I have. I have an old table down in the basement, and then I have these trays like this, and then I bring them up, and they are in the kitchen with everything else. But a fan would be really nice if you had, in a greenhouse, or like this one, it can get some ventilation in it. When this gets hot in the summer, just pop that little window up and your plants get good strong light and shelter and circulation of air, because if you don't have circulation of air, you will start to have like mildews and molds and that kind of thing. So this is going to be an absolutely delicious Chinese cabbage, which we will eat with great gusto.
This is Mary Robson. She's a nationally recognized author and lecturer and teacher about gardens. And today Mary's going to share with us her knowledge about bulbs.
Particularly daffodils. We are here on a time in Port Townsend when it's been snowing for a week or so. Some of you will remember that that happened at the end of March. And what I can show you is these wonderful bulbs that have survived the snow and are standing up just as happily as if it hadn't been 28 degrees and snowing. So these are daffodils, and I want to talk about, among other things, why you would, we can sit down with them for that matter. Why in the world would you want daffodils in your garden? These are terrific. They are foolproof. Deer don't eat them. Won't that make you happy?
Yes.
Yes. And they suit my garden because my garden is water-wise in the summertime. I'm sure you've been talking a lot about this with people. I don't do a lot of extra watering. The daffodils need water right now when they're blooming, and then they don't need anything at all until they get back to winter. So they suit, their life rhythm suits exactly the kind of weather that we have here in Port Townsend. They come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. I'll show you some when we get to another part of the garden that are tiny. That you can get them this tall, you can get them this tall. And when you get one from the grower, the flower is already in the bulb. So have you done much bulb planting yourself?
Yes, I have.
Okay, have you realized how foolproof they are?
Daffodils are one of my favorites. Also,
oh, great.
I'm a March baby, so the jonquil is the flower of the month.
That's the flower for March, right. And very often on St. Patrick's Day, you'll see people waving jonquils as part of it. And a jonquil is also a daffodil, and they're all narcissus. Did you grow up in the South at all?
No, in the north. In
okay, because some people in the South never call them anything but jonquils. And in point of fact, some of the jonquils are a separate class, and they're almost always fragrant, which is another thing I like about daffodils. They smell wonderful, and some of them are just perfumey. You know, if you could rub it behind your ear, that would be that would be really nice. So they do not have a lot of problems. They suit our climate, they suit our landscapes, and one of the nice things about planting them is I like to plant them along the edges of walkways where you're going to see them. Now, I've seen a lot of pictures of great big masses of daffodils planted. I just plant 12 or 13 at a time of a kind. I don't plant them by the 100, although people do that in different kind of, I would say, different income brackets. People plant them by the 100. But in this case, you see what I've got here is 4 clumps, and they have less than 15 in each clump, but they make a really good effect. So for the water-wiseness and the critterness, that critters don't eat them, squirrels don't eat them, which is swell. I have these little Douglas squirrels. They eat my crocuses, but they do not eat the daffodils. Have you found them to be good in your garden too, in terms of things taking after them?
Oh yes, I mean they take care of themselves.
Yeah.
They multiply.
Yes, they do.
It's another thing that I like about daffodils.
I do too. The next patch we'll look at while we're talking about daffodils is a batch that have been in the ground for 3 years, and every year I've had a little more. So that's part of what's great about daffodils. So what I've been doing is using mulch through here, and next year I'm going to plant all in this area, but I'm using the mulch to get rid of the weeds. This particular patch contains daffodils that have been in the ground for 3 years. And one of the things that's really helpful when you're choosing them is to figure out which ones are going to last once you get them into the ground, so you don't have to worry about replanting and replanting and replanting. This is one I like very much. It's called Ice Follies. I think it's the second best-selling daffodil that there is in the world, and one of its strengths is it's early and it stands right up there. This is another one that's come through the snow. It was in full bloom during the worst of the weather. So I try to get them planted between the 15th of November and about the 1st of January. The best time is between the 15th of November and about the 15th of December. But time gets away from me in the fall. This is something that happens to people, right? And then they get ready to go through winter from here.
And how do you prepare daffodils for winter?
They are really sturdy and strong. One of the things about them is that once they get in the ground, what you have to make sure is they get a good watering when you plant them. I have watered daffodils in a pouring rain, which makes people we knew she was strange, but this is really strange. What you want to do is dig a hole, fill it with water, let it drain, and then you're putting them in a place where the roots will go down into damp soil. Sometimes when you start planting in October, it's really dry. The soil will be dry down a foot or so. So I want to make sure they go into damp soil, and then I mulch them. But you will have noticed that both Pamela and I are pulling little shotweed, which is which is in here in abundance. One of the things I like to try to do is keep the planting clean enough so that they can bloom without having a lot of weeds, but we still have to weed. We could have this for lunch, but neither of us are in the mood. The other thing is that Pamela's holding some grape hyacinths, muscari, which is what these are, muscari armeniacum that are planted along the edge here. They also multiply wonderfully and have apparently no enemies. Deer don't eat them either, and they set off the daffodils really, really well. You were wondering about getting these through the winter?
Yes.
If they are planted on time, if they're planted on time, like between the 15th of November when the soils are cool and the rain is here, and about the 1st of January, they start putting down roots. Once they start making roots, they become immune to cold, which is really, one of the growers that I have known in Virginia told me this. He said once they have their roots down, the cold won't bother them. If you put them in the ground too late and then have a freeze like we had at the end of March, that might bother them if they didn't have their roots down. So you really want to get them into the ground in time. Other than that, and a layer of mulch, they don't need a darn thing once they're planted. And the planting always occurs in the worst possible weather. Have you noticed this? It's absolutely amazing. You're freezing, but you say spring will come, and that's why we do it. So this is an area that I plan to just leave this way and just let them expand into this particular section. They also have a nice background in the wall. The other difficulty with planting spring bulbs is they need a background. They look funny if they're just sitting in the mud without something to relate to, and in this case they have the wall to relate to, which helps a lot. So that's some tips about getting them through the winter. And keep weeding. Do not lose your focus on the weeding. So that's it.
What about the planting depth?
The depth, generally they say 3 times the depth of the bulb. So if the bulb is this big, it would go down about 6 inches or so. We'll talk about planting in containers because when they're in containers, I put them closer to the top. But in the ground, I go by the rule of 3 times the depth of the bulb. And your soil needs to be worked up and, as I said, watered before you start planting them. You do not need to fertilize when you plant the first round. The bulbs have everything in them that they need to survive the first year. But then when you reach this stage, I start fertilizing when they're about this high, and then fertilize them again after they bloom. They also need sun. You will notice looking around this garden, most of the daffodils are in really sunny spots because they need the sun in order to ripen and come back for next year. One of the reasons that daffodils succeed is that the grower has put the fertilizer and the water in it to make the shoot be there. It's there when you buy it. So this one is a paper white narcissus that didn't get planted at Christmas. So I'm going to cut it in half, not too fast, so that you can see that the flower is already in the bulb when you buy it. It goes all the way down the inside. So it's very much like an onion. Think of an onion when you're cutting one in the kitchen. The shoot is already here. This one, however, is not going to bloom. We have ruined it.
So Mary, since I have a lot of ground, why would I want to put my bulbs in containers?
A couple of reasons. One is it's fun. It's fun, and you get something portable that you can put somewhere to enjoy it. I like to move them around and look at them. The other part of that is what I've been doing is putting them together as if each of them were a little flower arrangement. The one in front of me has a mixture planted. It has daffodil ice follies. It has a hyacinth called Carnegie. It has a white crocus that I completely forget the name of, and it's got a fritillaria in it. The interesting thing about this is I bought these all on sale late in the season at a nursery in Port Townsend. The bulbs will often go on sale about the time the Christmas trees go up. And I bought all of these late and planted them. The only difference with planting in a container from planting in the ground is you need a drainage hole. Hoping everybody can see that. There's a drainage hole at the bottom. You need a drainage hole. And when you're planting, you put the soil all the way to the bottom of the pot. No gravel, no chunks of anything, just soil all the way down. And then when I put the bulbs in, I put them this close to the top of the pot. That's the thing a lot of people don't know. If you planted them 6 inches deep, they'd be way down here and they wouldn't have room to make roots. So what we're doing is giving each of these bulbs a place to make roots. So the final thing about putting them in containers is because they're a little closer to the top of the pot, sometimes they bloom earlier. And until I had a deer fence, whenever I planted tulips, I put them in pots, and then I was running up the stairs and hiding them on the top of the house so the deer wouldn't eat them. Anyway, they're marvelous to put together in mixtures like this or one of a kind in a container. And when these finish blooming, some of them I will take out of the containers and set the whole mass right in the ground, right after they finish blooming, and let them die down that way, and then they'll come back this year or next year, we hope. That's the intention anyway. So, have you tried them in containers too?
I've done different bulbs in containers at different times. I haven't done any this year except for some tulips. I added to an existing group of asters, and so that I have different things coming up at different times.
Right. Yeah. That helps sometimes too if you have a plant in a pot that's a very expensive pot. You don't want to leave that pot empty at any particular time. So you can actually plant over the bulbs when they finish, or you can take them out and reuse the pot. So I just love sitting in a wall full of containers full of daffodils. There's one more tip about taking care of your spring bulbs when you buy them. They'll come in the fall. Very often you go to a nursery and they give you a plastic bag to put these in. These are handy for carrying them just a little bit toward home, but if you're going to store them at all, put them in a paper bag. They have a lot of water in them and they tend to mold if you leave them in plastic, which a lot of people really don't know about that. And when they get moldy, they turn blue. That blue mold is penicillin. In case your HMO is not providing you with appropriate care, you can scrape it off and make your own penicillin. But the bulbs do better if you, I use plastic lunch or paper lunch sacks for mine when I'm storing them. Okay, that's it. Whew, that is so pretty. This is so pretty. Okay. What I wanted to note for you is daffodils can be this small. This is one that is smaller than a nickel when it's in bloom, or they can be as tall as the kind that you usually think of. This is one called Pineapple Prince, and it can get to be 20 inches tall. If you are gardening with children, it's fun to use some of the little ones. Of course, children like big things too, but it's fun to do that. The other neat thing, I was going to look in here and find one. The other wonderful thing about some of the little ones, we were talking about jonquils earlier. This is a jonquil. It should be fragrant.
Oh yes.
They have, some of the smallest daffodils are the sweetest in fragrance, and I think it must be because they just want the world to stand up and notice them. Anyway, they're absolutely wonderful. This is the time of year, April, right now, this is the time to go through your garden and look at the spots in your garden and say, where do I want to see daffodils there next year? The good catalogs are out now. I order very often from a catalog supplier in Virginia called Brent and Becky's. This is not, I'm not on their payroll, but they have great daffodils, and they just sent their catalog. They said, order now for delivery in the fall and for planting. So what I'm going to do in the next week is go through the garden and look at spots and say, that's a little bare. Next year when it's daffodil season, I want to see something there, and then figure out what I'm ordering. So And I'm going to go on having a combination of very small ones and very big ones. The area right here along the edge of this path, I'm going to gradually fill it up with very tiny daffodils, because you notice the scale as you go up the path. This is a place where you can really appreciate the little ones. They get lost in the landscape otherwise. So.
And I think another good point too is in the catalogs they tell you whether they're early season, mid-season,
Right.
or late season. And that way you can extend your
Right.
season by picking early, middle, or late season daffodils.
The other wonderful thing about the Pacific Northwest is we can have narcissus in bloom from the 1st of February to the 1st of May. And if we lived in a hotter climate, I lived in North Carolina for a long time, it gets hot really fast. The daffodils can't take the heat. So the fact that we have these long, cool, some people say depressingly cool springs, it's exactly the right thing for the daffodils. So when I have to put a sweater on, I think it's great daffodil weather. And I just find myself thinking this is the time of year when immortality would be wonderful. I would like to spend immortality in a field of daffodils. So.
May is rhododendron month, and we even have a week-long rhododendron festival. The word rhododendron comes from rhododendron, red tree.
And Pamela, did you know that 216 years ago, when George Vancouver brought his boat into Discovery Bay, he had a botanist and a doctor on the boat named Archibald Menzies, and he went scrambling up on the cliffs and found our native rhododendron macrophyllum in the woods.
Rhododendrons are grown mostly in places where there's a lot of mist.
That's right. There are many native rhododendrons come from China, Japan, India, and the Himalayas. They grow at all different elevations, and one thing that they all need is a gray, misty period, and our climate has that.
I understand that there are a lot of different kinds of rhododendrons.
There are. I was looking at the American Rhododendron Society information, and it turns out there are about 10,000 named cultivars. That means the ones that have the name on the tag with a little single quote like a Wisp or Mrs. Shutterworth or Bob's Blue. And then there are many, many more that are just the species. I think there are between 800 and 1,000 different rhododendron species. There's a wide variety to choose from, both in terms of height, texture, color of bloom, and time of bloom. Did you know there are even some that will bloom in the wintertime?
Yes, I understand that at the rhododendron garden on Whidbey Island, they said that you could actually have rhododendron blooming every month of the year as long as the weather conditions were right, of course.
There are some cultural things that are really important for rhododendrons. I think the main thing to know about them is they're very shallow rooted, and their roots are very fibrous and very fine, so it can take them quite a while to get established wherever you plant them in your garden.
Oh, I love the indumentum on this leaf, Sarah.
Isn't this interesting? It's just the way the plant grows, this rust-colored fuzziness on the underside of the leaf. There are also some leaves that get kind of almost a scaly appearance to the outside of the leaf, and there's really nothing wrong with it. It's just the way they grow.
What about taking care of rhododendrons?
Well, I think the most important thing is to understand that they are very shallow rooted, and what that means is the roots are close to the surface of the ground. So any time that you dig or cultivate or try to plant something directly under a rhododendron, you can damage the root structure, which is detrimental to the entire plant. It's a good idea to fertilize them, and that's done late winter. Probably a 10-8-8 fertilizer or rhodi food. You want something that is acidic. Nitrogen is an important element for them to have, as well as magnesium and phosphorus, because phosphorus is the element that helps them make their flowers.
And what about the environment, the abiotic things that can go wrong with rhodies? Where do you cite them?
Good point. There are lots of problems that they have. I counted up 13 diseases and 7 to 8 insects that are common pests on them. But if you site them in a location that gets morning sun or filtered light, light coming through the trees is really good. They want some sun to make the flowers, but the hot west afternoon sun is just no good on them, or the south sun.
What about their water requirements?
It's important to water them for the first 2 to 3 years that you put them in in the garden. With the shallow surface roots, they tend to dry out quite quickly. Once they're established, they can do fairly well. They're tough plants. And another way, Pamela, that you can keep them in good health is to put a mulch on them, specifically an acidic mulch. If you use something like oak leaves or needles from a conifer, particularly pine trees, that will increase the acidity of the soil. The normal soil pH in a garden is somewhere between 6 and 7, and rhododendrons really like a pH between 5 and 6, so that's quite acidic.
What about pruning?
It's really not necessary to prune your rhododendrons. A lot of people like to prune them, and that's okay. If you prune them, you want to prune them very lightly. The one exception to that would be an older plant. If you wanted to rejuvenate it and make it a little bit lower, you could take out some major limbs, but one a year over many years. You know, better than doing that, there's so many wonderful new varieties available that meet our microclimate. Why not just get a new plant that's better suited for the site? Another thing is, after the flowers are through blooming, the spent flowers are right here at the terminal ends of the limbs. There is really no reason other than aesthetics to take off the spent flowers.
This looks a lot like root weevil damage on the ends of these leaves.
I think you're right, Pamela. Those little notches on the sides of the leaves is typical root weevil damage. Root weevils are probably the most common insect damage that we ever see in plant clinic. They're all around the Northwest. One problem with them is that when the adults are out feeding, the larval stage has already done the damage under the ground.
So root weevils are my nemesis, Sarah. What do we do about them?
There are a couple of things you can do. One recommendation from Washington State University is to put nematodes in the soil. The problem with that is if the soil temperature is above 52 degrees or if the soil is too wet, they're not very effective. So it's all in the timing. Another strategy is to go out with a white sheet and shake the bush, collect all of the critters that you can, and hand dispose of them, which is not a pleasant task, but if you get rid of the adults, you'll have less babies, less larvae in the soil. One thing the larvae can do in the soil is eat the roots, and sometimes they can girdle a tree and kill it, or a bush.
You're supposed to do that at night too, aren't you?
They're more active at night. They feed more at night, and they feed mostly between May and August.
What's wrong with this one, Sarah?
Well, there are many things that can affect rhododendrons. My guess is that by looking at the underside of the leaf, this brownish color, and the white speckling on the top is some kind of a powdery mildew. Now, the way you can eliminate powdery mildew is to plant varieties that are resistant to it, and by resistant means less likely to get the powdery mildew. It doesn't mean that they won't get it. Or you can make sure there's good air circulation and they aren't too crowded, and make sure that they're not too wet. This rhododendron appears to have a problem with the soil pH. This symptom is called chlorosis. The veins remain green and between the veins turn yellow. The plant is not taking up the nutrients that it needs, and then the leaf is not able to make the chlorophyll it needs to grow a healthy plant. When this happens, what you can do is check the soil pH, make sure that the soil is acidic enough to keep the plant happy, fertilize it with a rhododendron type fertilizer. There are some other things that can go wrong with rhododendrons, and here in this leaf where you see the yellowing around the edges, this could be a manganese deficiency. The soils in our part of the world are frequently become deficient in manganese. If the soil pH is correct and the plant has had enough fertilizer and is in the right site, it will grow as a healthy specimen for you, bloom year after year, and reward you. So get the right plant and put it in the right place for having a healthy rhododendron season.
What's wrong with this one, Sarah?
Well, that's really interesting, Pamela. There are a couple of things that could be wrong with it. I'm thinking that the way the leaves are looking without much sheen on them, and the way they're curled and the way they're brown at the end, probably has to do more with root rot than anything else. When you have a rhododendron, if it's planted in heavy soils, it's really, really important to get it up on a berm so there's good drainage around it. They not only like good drainage, they like good air around their roots as well. But the problem with this sample is that when it's very cold, say below 32 degrees, rhododendrons will drop their leaves and curl them as a kind of a protection. And sometimes that looks like the wilt, which is exactly like the root rot wilt. Yet when they do that, there's a sheen to their leaves that you can see that the plant is still alive. And when the weather warms up and the sun comes out in the afternoon, the leaves go back up and open out.
One of the nice things about rhodies is that there's such a variety. Some rhodies you can grow just for the beauty of their leaf alone. It's just these that have the beautiful indumentum. Here's another one that I have that has a little bit different colored indumentum, a lighter colored.
This one also is much fuzzier. It feels almost like a teddy bear or something. And the fuzziness continues on down on the stem of the plant. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way the plant grows. On this sample leaf, we also have something else, Pamela, which is, do you see this?
Mm-hmm.
That's just some kind of a algae or something that has grown on there from being in the shade. And many times people will look at this growth on the leaf and think it actually might be a lichen or something. I don't know exactly what it is, but it scrapes right off, and it's just from growing there in the shade. Nothing wrong with it at all.
So you've got the variety of leaves from the small little azaleas that are in the rhododendron family to some really huge leafed rhododendrons, but then also the flowers can be so different. You can have single bell type flowers, large trusses that go straight up.
And they also come in a huge array of colors. One thing that's really fun is to look inside an individual bell, and in the throat frequently there'll be just a little brush mark of some color. I think they're just some of the most gorgeous plants. I've seen some that hug the ground like a ground cover, and I've seen some that are 20 to 40 feet high, growing almost like a tree in the forest.
And there are fragrant rhodies as well, aren't there?
Actually, there is. There's one called Fragrantissima, which I just love the name of that. I've never seen it, but it does have a wonderful smell.
You talked about not disturbing the roots of the rhododendrons, but are there other plants that are good to plant with rhodies?
I think rhododendrons look wonderful in a woodland setting where they would get filtered light. Conifers, salal, ferns are good plants to put with them. The important thing is when you plant those plants is to leave enough space around your rhododendron so you're not disturbing the roots. It'll make a nice ground cover, and then when the salal, for instance, will be green most of the year, but the rhododendron flowers against the conifers will show out as this gleaming show of beautiful color.
Oh, and another thing we should probably mention that rhododendrons can be deciduous as well, so you really need to do your homework on what you buy. You don't want to freak out and find all the leaves on the floor and worry that you might have done something wrong. So there are rhododendrons that are deciduous and rhododendrons that are evergreen.
I think there's a common maybe misconception, or it's just a matter of terminology, where people think azaleas and rhododendrons are two different plants. And in fact, they're all lumped together in the Ericaceae family. They're all ericaceous plants. Many of the azaleas tend to be deciduous, and fewer of the rhododendrons that we grow here are deciduous, although in the wild there are plenty that are. Azaleas tend to have are the sort of the florist, we think of them as the little florist pots that we bring in for Mother's Day. But then there's some that grow, I've seen some with beautiful yellow flowers on them. And we have the occidentalis, our native one, which is very, very pretty. I've got one growing in my garden.
In my garden, I plant carrot seeds. In my garden, I plant carrot seeds. Earth is my trusted partner. Earth is my nurturing mother. Earth is my protecting father. Earth is my beloved child. Earth is my trusted partner. Earth is my nurturing mother. Earth is my protecting father.